We're excited to have Andy Ruben, founder and executive chairman of Trove. Thanks for taking the time. Andy, can you tell us about Trove, how it started and what the organization does?
Sure. So I've been in this space for a while. Trove originally was started as a different company, which is a peer-to-peer marketplace. And the idea, though, and the mission has been the same. The idea is that we can, the best supply chain is no supply chain at all. The most efficient means of making something is using something that we already have. And as this trend has grown, the trend of thrifting or resale, pre-owned, pre-loved, whatever people call it, used, as that trend has grown, this has been a customer shift. Because all of us appreciate being able to find existing things, nicer things for less money. And so as that shift takes place, brands who have made these items in the first place have a lot at stake, they have a lot to lose, and they have a lot to gain. And so Trove powers those brands to basically follow their own items past the initial sale. So for brands to continue to monetize the items that they have designed and they've made and they've sold for the first time. And Trove does that with logistics, with technology, with program expertise and design, and we work with some of the leading brands in the world today.
Just building on that, can you explain what problem are you addressing? What problem is your innovation solving, and why is that innovation so much needed?
The challenge for brands, if you're Patagonia and you've made a nano puff and you sell the item the first time, right now that item might be sold 2 or 3 more times on an eBay or a different marketplace. And so the problem we're solving is that in a way that is both a risk that Patagonia loses opportunity to own their brand, to monetize that item, to stay close to the customer. And the flip side, that's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for a brand like Patagonia to continue to follow that item, to view that first sale as just the start of the journey, not the end of the journey. So what's difficult for a brand, Patagonia, any brand, is that requires technology that doesn't exist today. So Trove allows brands to basically rent that technology so that they can participate in this massive growing resale space.
So you alluded a little bit to that already, but I'm curious to understand exactly how does the Trove re-commerce platform, as you call it, how does it work? How do you enable the brands to do that? What do they rent, using your expression?
So the technology has a few different pieces. We'll start kind of with the first step in a journey. So if you bring, let's talk about Arc'teryx, another brand that we support. If you bring an Arc'teryx piece back to any store, there's an employee in that store that will use Trove technology to identify, price, and give you a gift card for the Arc'teryx piece you just brought back. So the first piece of the technology would be the trade-in technology. The second piece then is what happens to that jacket, let's say, at that point. So that jacket could go to an Arc'teryx facility, a Trove facility, a 3PL, but there's technology in that next step in that facility to condition grade, to merchandise, to list, to add the attributes to the item so that we can get, or Arc'teryx can get the most amount of value for it. That might include Arc'teryx selling the item itself. It might include Arc'teryx deciding to sell that on a marketplace, or if it's not in sellable condition, it could be upcycled, recycled, etc. But that's kind of a reverse logistics technology. The third then is the ability to sell that item. So you imagine Arc'teryx having 100,000 different one-of-one items. How do you merchandise those items on a website that's built for SKUs? And so the technology that Trove has built and Arc'teryx can then use allows them to merchandise that jacket in the scope of an online storefront. Or if they chose in a capsule in a physical store, you might have brought the jacket back in, right, or somewhere else. And then the final stage of the technology is just the end-to-end data picture, the insights for what is that item, when was it made originally, how has it now come back, how many times has it come back, what is the overall price we paid to bring it back compared to the price we resold that item at. So just the insights picture around customers, the brand, and the finances that allow brands to build this as a business.
Interesting.
So those are the 4 pieces of the Trove technology.
If you reflect on this journey so far, this journey to scale, what have been the biggest challenges that you've experienced?
The biggest challenge for this space is that there's a lot of conversation about the space, a lot of interest in the space, but it's still very much subscale. So even the players who are the furthest advanced, we're taught the Eileen Fishers and the Patagonias, they're still operating at a small percentage of the mainline business. And so what's difficult for any player in that space is how you have enough funding and money and profit up front to invest in very deep new technology that's fairly broad, right, to serve these world-class brands, while knowing that the brands are kind of building, but it's currently subscale.
So moving from a pilot stage to a real larger commercial scale adoption, I think that's the
piloting.
context.
And piloting is fine. It's just the idea of building it in a way that you realize this has the potential and even the likelihood to be a significant portion of how I interact with my customers.
If we look at the flip side, so away from the challenges and more to the successes, what would you classify as your biggest successes so far?
The part that I enjoyed the most is working with these brands. So we just launched a program with Carhartt, we just launched Canada Goose. When you work with these brands that we're inspired by, they've got such depth, in the narrative of Carhartt's historical, who they are as a brand, what they stand for, their values. So to work with world-class brands like this and take these capabilities, the capabilities of how you merchandise single SKU items is the same for any brand. Giving a brand like Carhartt the ability to make it Carhartt, not Arc'teryx, not On Running, not Eileen Fisher, to make it theirs. That's what I enjoy the most.
Reflecting on the industry and the fashion industry overall that we're talking about here, what do you see as the biggest hurdles that the industry has to yet overcome?
I think that the legislation in the EU is laudable. Like, it is exciting, the directives that are happening in the EU compared to the US. What I don't see yet that I remain very concerned about is I think we'll need that regulation because we're dealing with a system. And individual actors have different incentives than the overall system. And even though I believe the individual actors, the brands in the fashion industry, to be well-meaning and really want to be doing the right thing, the incentive structure that surrounds them is focused on growth. And no matter how much less bad or smaller the footprint is for every blouse or every pair of pants, the fact that we made 150 billion garments in the last 12 months dwarfs everything else. And it's very difficult for an individual brand to address the growth in the overall units in the industry. And so as we as an industry look forward and we look at, with extended producer responsibility, how do we set the pricing on that, for example? I think we've got to look at the full system and understand in that way, it's got to be set relative to an absolute number, not a negotiation of what can we accept and what can we do and will that be good or not. So I think that there's got to be more hard facts in the actual unit growth that provides a mechanism back to individual actors who are intent and want to do the right thing, but exist in an industry where it's almost an unfair ask in the way that it's structured today. It's very difficult to address the growth of number of brands and number of pieces per brand.
So the importance of sticks and carrots to address the growth paradigm and also to level set in terms of efforts. So there's legislation, obviously, that's clear boundaries and guardrails for everybody, and then there's individual actors. What's your perspective on the role of collaborations and brands or manufacturers or innovators working together to change the system?
I probably have a slightly different viewpoint than many in the space. Of course, there's collaboration on things like standards, on collective action on things like that. But when we talk about business itself, one of the benefits of business is the competition. And that competition, I think, is an incredible force for actually driving the change in these circular models. And so I want to see brands compete to do that, because I think it will drive greater innovation, and it is the brand in competition in that way is one of the few levers that I see that's big enough for the challenges that we have.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think circular business models also lend themselves for really utilizing this competitive advantage. So moving forward faster, what's next for Trove? I'm curious to hear what is...
we're right now, like, we see a vision of 1 out of 4 items coming from other people. And right now, at best, if we look at the industry, resale for brands is still less than 1%. So, I think we've got a lot of opportunity to accelerate the growth of this industry. And so the growth right now is just about scaling the technology that's working in. We're in 6 facilities right now in North America, but a year ago we were in 1. And so the ability to go from 1 in a year to 6, and then from 6 to 36, and 36 to, whatever that is, that happens much easier than the first move to go from 1 to 2. If that makes sense. So it's just about scaling the technology, and what's really taken a long time is making sure the technology is ready to scale.
Yeah. So you've been working with Fashion for Good also since 2018, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So early. And oh my gosh, yes.
I'm just curious what your reflections are on that journey. What role has Fashion for Good played, and how do you reflect on that?
When I talk about the things as an entrepreneur that you've got to figure out, one of the most important things is the connections to see things that you don't necessarily see. I mean, a good example recently with Fashion for Good is we've spent multiple calls with European regulation. And it's not something that we are expert in, and the ability to get up to speed with a partnership with Fashion for Good has been extraordinary for us. I don't know how long that would have taken if we were not working with you all. Introductions to brands that we wouldn't have had exposure to, brands who are showing up with Fashion for Good, who are asking questions, where Fashion for Good can make the connection to innovators. And whether or not that turns into a commercial partnership, it's all learning for basically convening groups of people who are trying to drive a change in a similar direction. So I think in that way, when I talk about brands competing, I love that. When I talk about the need of where there is a need for shared learning, Fashion for Good is such a good example of how do you bring together like-minded people, share knowledge that benefits everybody so that we can be more competitive. And I think that's where, gosh, I'm so glad that you all brought us into one of those early cohorts.
That's great.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah. So in closing almost, what advice would you give, we haven't spoken about that, what advice would you give consumers to trying to be more sustainable?
It's very difficult to understand when a brand is doing something that really aligns with your values and when it's not. But I think increasingly, it's not even advice. I think more and more customers are looking for, where is a brand aligned to my values and how I shop? Buying used, buying an item that already exists, hands down, one of the best things we can do. We think so much about how items are made, which is great, and we need to think more about that. At the same time, the best thing we can do is buy an item that doesn't need to be made. And so the second thing I'd recommend is buy pre-owned, 100%. Let's keep items in use. And the goal is to keep items in use. We can all use items forever, totally works. Most of us don't do that. Most of us crave new things. And so if we're going to crave new things, we might as well move the things we've already made around a lot more. And the easiest, best way to do that is every brand you shop with just has new and used side by side, integrated together. And whenever you're shopping new, you've got used options as well.